Okay, welcome everyone to our budget forum. I'd like to introduce Tara Ramirez, our PTA president, who will be facilitating the Q&A. And then just so you know who's in the space with you, I'm Christine Ackerman, I'm the superintendent. We're going to go Adam, Jamie, Andrew Lennon, and Andrew Crucilia. Go ahead, Adam.
Good evening, Adam Pease. I'm the assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction.
Good evening, I'm Jamie Edelman. I'm the assistant superintendent for pupil personnel services.
Good evening, I'm Andrew Lennon, the assistant superintendent for business.
Hello, I'm Andrew Crucilia, the assistant superintendent for human resources and leadership development.
And I want to thank David Hayes for hosting our Zoom this evening, and we're going to begin our presentation. We'll go through a whole bunch of slides first. I'm going to answer some questions that have been brought to the board's attention through public comment, and then we'll take a Q&A about the budget that'll be facilitated by our PTA president, Tara Ramirez, as I had just shared previously. So just to begin, we're going to go to the next slide. So this year's budget proposal is $138,296,286, which is a proposed increase of about 4.3 million or 3.23%. And our budget presented to the board for consideration tomorrow night is within our tax cap. Now, our Board of Education calendar, budget development calendar begins in the fall, where we start to have discussions with our administrative team about what our needs are the following school year. And then we start presenting to the community in January. And we have multiple presentations throughout the month of March, where we talk about the overview of the budget, and then we break down into different components. And we're going to share some highlights of that with you this evening, but all these presentations are online in greater detail. And then, of course, once the board acts on our proposed budget for their adoption consideration, we have our full master budget available for any community member that would like to view that online and in the district office. On May 3rd, we have our public hearing where we will present the budget under regulation for your review. And at that night, the library will also present their budget for the community, and our vote is scheduled on May 16th, 2023 at Horace Greeley High School. And that's where the community will vote on our budget, the library board's budget, and members of the community who are running for seats on both boards. And so our budget is grounded in our board's three strategic questions. The first question is ensuring that we're presenting a budget that's financially responsible for the community's consideration. The second is focused on making sure that teaching and learning is at the center of our budget making decisions for our kids. And the third question was added recently and addresses social emotional learning and making sure that we are embedding that in all of our decisions when we're moving forward and planning for our students into the new school year. We also have commitments that we make sure that we follow as we talk about what our needs are. The first is that students are at the center of every decision. We want to make sure our budget not only preserves what we currently have, but expands our programs, both academically and social emotionally. We want to have enough flexibility within the budget to support our class sizes. We want to be able to address what we need in order for our infrastructure to be maintained in a safe and reasonable way. We have to be mindful of our residents that are concerned about their taxes. We have a huge population of community members who don't have children in our districts, and they've expressed us concern about their taxes. So we need to be mindful of that in our planning. And then we're in the process of redoing our strategic plan. So there has to be enough flexibility within the budget that when that plan is comes to conclusion, that we can make adjustments based on what's identified as our needs moving forward for the next 5 years. And so now I'm going to transition over to Dr. Adam Pease, who is going to do an overview of our curriculum and instruction budget, as well as our technology needs going into next year.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Christine. So I'm going to start my section with just an overview of some of our student results. Obviously, all the work we do leads to student learning, and we have a variety of measures that we use to track that learning over time. So this first slide shows how students in grades 1 through 8 have been moving through the educational system with regard to their MAP scores, which is a nationally normed test. You can see math on the left side and ELA on the right side. And what we're looking for, the students are tested 3 times a year, fall, winter, and spring. This is the last year that we had data for this, 21-22. Obviously, we haven't given the spring administration, so we don't have this year's data, but we are tracking that growth in each grade over time. So we have nice curves there. This next graph, you can see grades, again, 1 through 8, which is where we give the assessment from 2019-20 all the way up to 22-23. And this is the math. It shows you the math results for each year. So you can see how students are doing over time. You can even track cohorts from grade to grade. And that black line that's there, that's actually the national norm. So you can see the average student score above the national norm over time, strong performance by our students. Here you can see how the students in math break out with regard to the categories they're put in based on their score performance. You can see low, low average, average, and high. And obviously this assessment is normed and designed to really create more of a bell curve. And you can see how our charts are more skewed to the right side with more students in the high average and high range than you typically find. The whole test is normed so that you have more students in the average range. So again, just shows the strength of the academic program here and how the students are progressing. I have the same charts for ELA. This is our ELA chart. Again, that black line is national norms, and you can see that our students across the board score above those national norms in every grade. Again, this is ELA, so this is the reading assessment, grades 1 through 8. Excuse me, and then this is how the students break out into these categories, and you can see that shift to the right, so you don't get a typical normal distribution. Instead, you see that high bar towards the right side with the green high average and the orange high bar. So again, just really strong performance. We thought that was important with regard to your support of the budget to give us the resources that we need to make sure students continue to progress in this way. Excuse me. This is our district performance on the New York State assessment. So I'm switching assessments on you from MAPS to New York State. And this shows how our district is doing compared to other districts across the state that give the same assessment. You can see ELA on the left side and math on the right side, that our students in the last 2021 and 22 scored well above the state averages. It puts us well above the 90th percentile. Most of these hover around between 96th and 100th, 99th percentile with regard to our ranking as a district when it comes to percent proficient in New York State for both ELA and math. So I also wanted to share some data with regard to how our Greeley students are doing. I wanted to share with you average scores, mean scores for both the English regions and the algebra regions. This graph has gotten a little bit more complicated than it has been in the past because there was no regions given in 2020 due to the pandemic. And then 2021, there was some COVID optional assessments where students could opt in and take the regions if they wanted to. And then we also had a shift in math where we are offering algebra for all in 8th grade. So you see that noted on the right side. But again, with these averages, very strong performance from our students in both English and math. And then finally, we wrap up with some statistics from the Greeley class of 2022. We don't yet have all these stats for 2023. We will share them when we have them, but you can see the ACT average score 29.5, which is a very strong score. And you also see 2021 compared to 22 with regard to the SAT average of 1337. And then you see the literacy side and the math side well in, just below 700 for those scores. So they're really, really very strong showing by those Greeley students. And then you can see on the left side some of the accolades: 29 national merit commended students, etc. 98% of the class of 2022 went on to higher education. Most of our students choose college after Greeley. And then I also wanted to share some of our AP scores. You can see our students, we have a very strong menu of AP offerings at Greeley, and you can see how many students take those exams and what their average scores are. Generally do very well, and they appreciate the opportunity to challenge themselves in those classes. And we are offering AP Chinese next year, although some students take that test to just challenge it on their own. We're going to offer the curriculum for that class next year. So we've added that. So we anticipate that number will go up over time. All right, so I'm going to move into some of the curriculum highlights with regard to the budget. We continue to work on our curriculum to make sure that it's culturally responsive, to make sure it's current, modern, and powerful for our students. So just to pull out some highlights, you've got that culturally responsive adjustments, the algebra shift where we're offering algebra in 8th grade, and that required some adjustments to our 9th grade math program. Middle school world language, we continue to work on that curriculum, and that will likely be part of our strategic plan with regard to potentially having a elementary school language program, certainly taking a look at that. We also are shifting, as many of you know, Living Environment, which is a high school Regents course, into the 8th grade. So students will have that option. We're focused on 9th and 10th grade English curriculum. We heard as part of the thought exchange that we need to turn that rigor knob up in 9th grade and 10th grade humanities, English, and social studies. So we're doing that work. We've got some new electives at Greeley. Middle school English language arts curriculum. We're redesigning that scope and sequence and revising the high school business program. So those are just some of the highlights. With regard to some updated curriculum materials, I won't go through the whole list, but you can see the list here. TC units of study will be updated. They have released a new kind of research-based updated version of the TC units of study. So we'll be purchasing those. That's in this budget. And then you can see the other highlights. Phonics First will continue to use. Benchmark Word Study as our word study, grammar, spelling program in grade 3 through 5. Living Environment in grade 8, I mentioned, our science program in K4. This budget funds those kits. Smithsonian Science is a new program in grade 5. This is the first year, as well as other technology tools that we fund through the curriculum office. Curriculum and instruction budget also supports our professional learning experiences for our faculty. You can see them there on the right side, engaged in professional learning. There's a variety of different ways that our faculty engage in professional learning, whether it's the new teacher induction program, a variety of courses around diversity, equity, and inclusion, Wilson Fellows, which we use Wilson as part of our reading intervention program. We have Teachers College professional developers, benchmark professional developers, and more. So this budget also supports continued professional learning for our faculty, which we know is important. I wanted to highlight a few of the authors that we brought in over the last year. You can see the diversity with regard to us leaning on college professors and other experts in their various fields to make sure they kind of work with us to inspire our thinking, push us forward, and make sure that we stay on the cutting edge with regard to curriculum and instructional practices as we think about the future of the district. And here, I actually wanted to share a little bit. I'm going to kind of transition in. We recently surveyed our faculty and staff. So another thing that we're thinking about with regard to how we support students is how well our teachers or how well our teachers feel supported. So we actually sent a survey out recently to our teachers and our staff, and we thought we would share some of the results with you. We sent this survey out on our last superintendent conference day, our March superintendent conference day. So you can see the teacher survey responses. We had almost 70% of the faculty responded, and then staff was a little bit lower at 36%, but all of our faculty and staff had the opportunity to complete this survey. And we wanted to pull out just a couple of highlights. There was a cluster of questions on a sense of belonging, and you can see 69% of our faculty and staff responded favorably in that they feel a strong sense of belonging to our district. You can see well-being. Again, there was a cluster of questions around that. You can say 63% favorable. On the right side, it compares with other districts that have given these questions or given these surveys nationally. So you can see where we rank. Cultural awareness and action. This has to do with how comfortable staff members and how supported staff members feel with regard to diverse conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you can see there's a 62%. And then there was also a cluster of questions around how well they believe we support students to have discussions around cultural awareness, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you can see a pretty strong showing at 60%. We know there's room for improvement here, but overall, we think it's a pretty good response and gives us some actionable items that we can think about and work on. I also wanted to share from that same survey, there were some specific questions. For example, I feel that my work matters to me. And so we had like a 98% favorable response to that from our faculty and staff. I feel like my work is meaningful. We had a 94% favorable I feel engaged at work in the last week, 87%. I feel excited at work in the last week, 87%. And then there were some things that gave us a little more pause, like I feel stressed at work, and we got 52%, which is a high number for people to feel stressed at work. So what we're going to do with these data is we're going to share them with our district equity team, and our building equity teams are going to do some work with regard to how to turn these data points into action for our staff. But overall, a strong showing with regard to how our teachers are feeling connected at work. They feel like their work matters, and they feel like it's meaningful here in the district. All right, so I'm going to transition. The third major chunk that I have, this is a third of three, is about our instructional technology and infrastructure. So we have our three goals with regard to our tech department on the right side. You can see technology-infused active learning environments, collaborative citizens, and increasing the value and efficiency of learning time are the three digital learning goals that we have. And with regard to, you can see how our students are kind of integrating that technology into the instructional program as they learn. We are excited that our STEAM spaces are now all up and running. Through the pandemic, we had to be creative with regard to the use of instructional space for things like cohort rooms and whatnot. So now these STEAM spaces have all really come online. They were part of a capital project about 5 years ago when we opened these spaces. And now we have our maker spaces in the elementaries, our STEAM centers in the middle school, and a STEAM building at Greeley. And you can see some of that work now. So those spaces are all fully operational and up and running, although we did have to press a pause button on them a little bit during the pandemic. So we're excited to have them open. You can see with regard to the technology budget, we've got four major components: cybersecurity, Ed Law 2D, which is all about privacy with regard to student data, device refresh, making sure our students and faculty have the devices they need that work and are updated. And then you can see infrastructure upgrades like Wi-Fi and connectivity ports, closets, things like that. So with regard to student device planning, you can see I put a yellow arrow down there in the middle on the 2023-24 budget year. K1, we're going to be getting new iPads. K1 and 2 will be refreshing, and then also in 5 and 6. So those are the components. We have kind of a rolling refresh, so we make sure that students always have devices or should have devices that work, as well as our faculty. So you can see how that plan rolls out over time.
And now
I'll turn it back over to enrollment projections.
So now we're going to transition it to Andrew Crescilia, who's going to talk about our sectioning for next year.
Sure. Thank you, Christine. If we go to the next slide there, I don't think I have control over that, Adam. I think you might be having to click us forward to start this section of the presentation with an overview of enrollment trends over a 10-year span, 2016, 2026, actual enrollments, and then anticipated enrollments. And you can find the next year, the 23-24 school year, a little bit to the right there, where we're anticipating a slight decrease in enrollment overall, but very similar numbers from 3,574 to 3,545 for next year. Guiding our staffing for anticipated staffing is our thresholds for class size. And these are been reviewed before. I'll go over them now. For kindergarten, our threshold class size is 20 students. First grade is 23 students. Second through fourth is 25 students. Then fifth grade at the middle schools and the high schools, the threshold is 28. That guides our planning. What you will see here is a breakdown of that enrollment across 2 years at the elementary schools by grade level. So it gets into a little bit more detail here. You see the 22 and 23 school year, and then what we anticipate and what we're planning for the 23 and 24 school year. So what you'll see over on the far right is that we are within the thresholds for all of our grades. And one particular point of interest here is with our kindergarten classes. And while we have projections for anticipated enrollment in kindergarten, we don't have a grade before kindergarten to then plan with. So those numbers are something that as we enroll, we do our best to anticipate, but then we also plan to support. So we do have 3 positions within the budget that we can implement into kindergarten to support if the enrollment increases beyond what we anticipated. We started off this year with 4 sections planned for all 3 schools in kindergarten, listing us at the threshold of 20 as our benchmark starting place. And as we're going through the process, we already do know that we anticipate that we're adding a 5th section of kindergarten to Grafflin, and then we would keep following along as students enroll in kindergarten and then adjust as we have to. As you'll see going there are additional sections in several grade levels here to support remaining beneath that threshold. So if you take a look at sort of Roaring Brook, let's say in fourth grade, you can see the addition of 2 sections there, and then so forth in third grade in West Orchard, there's an additional section. So we're anticipating that we will be below the threshold. And then this is just a detailed view of our middle school sections, 5th through 8th grade. This year is 22, 23 on the left, and you can see 23, 24 anticipated on the right. And again, we are remaining below our thresholds. And you can see as we adjust those estimated sections on the right, there are some sections added. We anticipate adding to Bell in this proposed budget in the 5th and the 6th grade. And that is to help keep us below the threshold and help to adjust the balance between class sizes between the 2 middle schools. And then here's a slide on our high school enrollment, which is, we can see the current and projected class sizes across the high school. And then we can take a look at how we track class size. And the class sizes are a little bit different, a little bit more challenging to anticipate and measure at the high school compared to, let's say, the elementary school, because students do have a lot of choice in classes that they choose. But taking the 4 core subject areas here, we can give us a really good estimate on the class sizes that could fluctuate on any individual class, but they are well below our thresholds for class size at the secondary level.
Thank you, Andrew. And now we're going to transition over to Jamie, who will share our special education and related services highlights for our budget presentation tonight.
Thanks, Christine. I don't know who's, thank you, Adam, or whoever's making those changes. So in special education, all of our decisions are based on students' IEPs and their individual needs, as well as our commitment to inclusion. We are always considering the least restrictive environment, equitable opportunities, specialized instruction, and the academic and social development for our students. We also think about the skills and attributes of a really graduate. This chart shows how our students with IEPs are distributed over IDEA's 13 disability categories. And what you'll see here is most of our students are in the category of learning disability or other health impairment. Other health impairment is a category where there's some health condition that is causing a learning challenge for the student. So a student who has ADHD might fall into that classification category of other health impairment. The other 2 categories that I would just draw your attention to is the autism category, where we had an increase of 8 students this school year. And also the emotional disturbance category, which we doubled from 4 to 8, which is consistent with the mental health issues that young people are having throughout our country in this day and age. As you can see, the majority of our students with IEPs are educated in our district, in our schools. However, there are some students who need a more restrictive placement and might be receiving their education at an out-of-district placement. And in very unusual circumstances, we might have kids who need to receive their education at home. So you can see on this chart that our classification rate is low. We hover around 10%, whereas the state is at around 18%. But even though our classification rate is low, we are committed always to continuous improvement in the area of special education. So we are always offering professional development opportunities for our teachers to get better and better at what they do. Our priorities for the 23-24 school year in terms of professional development are around integrated co-teaching, social skills training, dialectical behavioral therapy, and testing and IEP development. Those professional development opportunities are really important because at the elementary school level, our focus is on social skills training, particularly for our students who have an autism diagnosis. At the middle school, we will be offering integrated co-teaching in all of our math and ELA classes every day for the full period, and in science and social studies every other day for the full period, with the exception of 8th grade. And in 8th grade, since we offer high school level courses in science, or we are for the first time in this upcoming school year, we will have ICT full-time in those 8th grade classrooms as well. And then in our high school, an area of focus and priority will be on our learning center or resource room program.
Right, so now I'm going to transition to the financial slide. So Andrew Lennon.
Thank you, Dr. Ackman. So the first slide here, we show just the comparison year to year by some of the spending categories that we'd like to focus on here. And as you can see in our budget presentation, salaries and benefits are clearly the largest piece of our budget. You will see that our salary increases for the current year are about 2.4%. Benefits is about 3.2%. So salaries represents the all staff, all instructional staff, non-instructional staff, clerical, custodial. That just gives you a picture of what we're talking about there. In our benefits category, we're talking about health insurance, which the premiums for that is going about 5.5% increase year over year. We've got our pension benefits, our Social Security, dental, vision, and other employee benefits. That makes up the bulk of that expenditure area. Debt service, you'll see the decrease there. That decrease is projected based on our known declining debt service for the existing bonds that we have. We talk quite a bit about that in the budget, in the bond presentations, and you'll see at the very bottom of the slide, capital transfer is going up by about 1.6 million to offset that. That was a conversation we had quite often in the bond conversation as we tried to bridge the gap between the old debt retiring and the new debt coming on in future years. So you'll see that shift back in future budgets. Operations and maintenance is another area of the budget that's going up. This increase in operations and maintenance is largely driven by inflation, and we'll talk more about inflation in just a few minutes, but that's everything from supplies to fuel to heating oil, natural gas, and even supplies for our operations and maintenance department are really driving that increase there. Transportation reflects contractual increase that we anticipate for our contract transportation, and all the other categories here are a small parts of the budget, but equally important. So we've got special education. Again, this is the non-salary portion of our special education program, going up by about $22,000, or going down by about $22,000, really related to out-of-district placement cost adjustments that we've got factored into the budget. In our BOCES category, you're seeing a large increase, and then below it, a decrease in technology. That increase in BOCES services is actually related to technology, where we're shifting some of our service providers from contract providers into the BOCES offerings. This does two things. It helps us gain some competitive bidding options through that program, but also state aid will come for the BOCES services. So that state aid will start to show up in the following school year. The next slide it really is just another view of the overall budget, but showing the percentage makeup of each of these categories. And again, as you can see, the salaries and benefits section of the budget is the largest portion of our overall budget year to year. How we're funding this budget is on the next slide. And obviously, real property taxes is kind of the biggest piece of our funding source. That's going up at 2.1%, which is at the tax cap, as Dr. Ackman mentioned earlier. State aid is increasing by about $887,000 based on the governor's aid projection that we have from about a month ago. So we're waiting to see that final state budget and how that flushes out. But as of our current projections, that's going up 8.4%, which is helpful as we try to fund the increases in our budget. We left appropriated fund balance, or the use of our savings, flat year over year. I talked at length about fund balance at the last board meeting, so I won't go into that now, but certainly this is an area of the budget planning that we want to keep a close eye on. Sales taxes increased year over year, so we're showing that as an increase, as is down below use of money and property. That's where the interest rate assumptions on our bank accounts are going up quite a bit as the interest rates are rising at the Fed. We're seeing that in some of our deposit accounts, so we're projecting that increase year over year. The next slide is really just a percentage breakdown of all those categories, again, showing the percentage of the budget largely funded by real property taxes and state aid. The next chart is really just a picture of kind of where we've come and what we're seeing currently in terms of inflation. So for quite a long time, we've seen interest rates very, very low, inflation very, very low. But now over the last 2 years since the pandemic, you see that interest rates have been extremely high compared to what the most recent history. So these increases in inflation are slowly impacting our budget. They certainly hurt us a little bit last year. They're going to hurt us again a little bit more in the coming year. Most notably, again, in our fuel costs, in our supply costs, and even the delivery charges we see from our vendors. So this is important context. Thankfully, we seem to be coming over the top of the hill here. And I know that the February CPI number was a bit lower than the 6% that we had in January, which is good. The next slide is really just what does it all mean for our property owners, right? So we talk about our budget, we talk about our tax levy. So the $119 million tax levy has to get split by our taxpayers. And this chart gives you my current estimate based on the information that I have from the towns regarding assessed value and the current equalization rates that we've got from New York State, and how we split that levy between the town of Newcastle and the town of Mount Pleasant. So we're projecting at the moment that about 90.7% of the levy will get allocated to Newcastle, 9.3% of the levy to Mount Pleasant. And as we calculate the property tax rate from that, it appears right now that the Newcastle taxpayers will see about a 2.08% tax rate increase. And our neighbors in Mount Pleasant will see a decrease based on their allocation of the property tax levy of about 4.49%. In terms of contingency budget, so if the budget were to fail, the board has an option to go back out to a revote in June with either the same budget, a lower budget, or a higher budget, or they could adopt a contingency budget. If that second budget vote does not pass, then we'd be forced to go to a contingency budget. And amongst other things, the contingency budget requires us to have a $0 levy growth year over year. There are also some spending requirements in terms of what we are and what we are not able to include in our budget for the following year. So ultimately, if the budget were to fail, we'd need to find about $2.467 million in savings in our current budget. And if I reflect back on a slide I showed a few minutes earlier, where about 71% of our budget is tied to salaries and benefits, there certainly would be personnel implications in some of those reductions if we had to go down that path.
So I'm just going to work through just some summary slides before we get to the Q&A. So again, we are proposing to the Board of Education tomorrow night a budget of $138 million approximately, or a 3.2% increase on our budget to budget. And we feel like the budget we're presenting is responsive to the board's strategic questions, meets our operating standards, supports physical, social, and emotional safety, maintains a robust professional learning opportunities for our staff, adjusts personnel based on enrollment, is below our tax cap to ensure that it's fiscally sustainable, and adheres to our class size contractual requirements. Just want to go over some just basic voter information. If you have questions regarding your eligibility to vote, please just call Lisa. She's in the office 8:30 to 4:30. She will be able to help you answer any questions you have about your eligibility to vote in the election. But some basic information: you have to be a U.S. citizen, you have to be residents of our school district for at least 30 days, and you have to be 18 years old. And if you would like an absentee ballot, please again make sure you reach out to Lisa, and she can help facilitate that for you. And we can also, work through any kind of needs that you have. I know many of our community members still have some concerns about coming out in public. And so we can work through that with you if you just give us a call, and we'll be able to support you in the best way that we can, as long as we're complying with voter regulations. And then I just would like to share, we have 2 open seats on the board next year, and they're both 3-year terms beginning on July 1st. And there are qualifications that you need to have in order to run for the board. And again, if you have any questions about that, you can certainly reach out to Lisa and pick up a petition, or talk about what areas you need clarification on. But we do have 2 open seats on the Board of Education for this upcoming election. And so let me just talk about where we are with our budget calendar. So tonight we're at the PTA budget forum, and tomorrow we'll be presenting the budget for the board's consideration for adoption. May 3rd is our budget hearing. And our budget hearing for our district budget. And then of course the public library will present their budget. And then our budget vote and election is May 16th of 2023 at Greeley. So we're still taking comments, so you can certainly email the Board of Education, Andrew Lennon or me, any questions or comments about the budget, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And so now I just want to go over some of the issues that have been brought to the public comment space at our recent board meeting. So the first question was, why are we doing this on Zoom? So it's really easy, simple answer. We had a whole bunch of meetings in the fall for the capital project and barely anyone came on site, but we had a lot of people who attended the webinars. So we felt like the best way to get information out to our community and to answer questions was through our webinar process. So that's why we decided to work through this format this year. Next slide. There have been questions about elementary AIS math. So we've been talking about how do we support our kids in this budget. And I know there's been concerns about students not being able to make morning sessions based on transportation restrictions. So we will run AIS in the morning going into next school year like we do this school year, because that works for many of our families. So we don't want to change that that time period, because many of our children who are involved in AIS services don't want to be pulled from other classes to receive math support, but we'll also offer it during the school days for families that can't make the morning session. And we'll talk about with our families directly impacted by that next year, how we can support the facilitation of those services during the school day. And I just wanted to provide an overview for you of how many students at the elementary level were in AIS instruction in grades 1 through 4. And the criteria to be placed in AIS is the performance on the MAPS tests, unit assessments and teacher recommendation. And of course, for grade 4, it would be the results on the 3rd grade New York State assessments are a factor in determining who would receive AIS services. So I just wanted to provide an update on that based on some feedback we've received in the past meetings. All right, next slide. Okay, we had some questions about kindergarten enrollment and how we did the sectioning on kindergarten. And so there's 4 factors that go into our initial sectioning, which adjusts at times based on what happens during the registration process. So first we have our live birth data, and we have a chart all the way out to 2035. And so next year we're projected to have 261 students in kindergarten, but they don't always come. Parents have a right to enroll their students for kindergarten, and there's like an age range. So you can enroll your child if they meet some birth date requirements. So they could be 4, they could be 5, or they could be 6. Now we screen kids that come in and register for kindergarten who are 6 to see if they should be in 1st grade, but often they're placed in kindergarten because they haven't had that formal schooling. So we have to provide some flexibility in our numbers, because parents may decide to hold their kids a year, or they may be entering their kids in a year and we anticipated that they would be coming the year before. And then we have to think about housing availability. So if we have a lot of homes on the market, that means many new families might be moving in. And so that could impact our kindergarten enrollment. But if we don't have a lot of housing on the market, then we could anticipate that our enrollment would not grow because of that. So we have to think about that. And then we also have to think about our students that are enrolled in our CPSE program, who would be coming to kindergarten, who may need to access services. So we have to plan for them. So right now, we had initially planned 4 sections for everybody, but we have added a section in Grafflin, like Andrew had shared, because we're at 86 students in Grafflin currently. Now, kindergarten registration is over, but that doesn't mean that kids and families won't continue to enroll their kids in kindergarten. So this is where we are right now. Again, our project is 261. Our actuals at this moment is 227, but we have 2 additional positions in the budget in case West Orchard and Roaring Brook need another section of kindergarten. So we're going to continue to watch it. All right, next slide. All right, so today we had a lot of emails. I was copying a lot of emails to the Board of Education about the school shooting in Nashville, which of course is tragic. And I want to assure you that safety and security is the highest priority for our administration. If kids and staff don't feel safe, then they can't learn. And I don't want parents concerned about safety and security of our students in our school and feeling like we're not addressing our needs. And I just want to begin by saying over the past 5 years, we've done a lot to address safety and security in this district based on audits that have been conducted and recommendations made to us by experts in the field, but also through internal task force that have looked at our procedures and how we are operating within the context of a school day to make sure we're providing the safest environment possible. So just want to remind everyone that we've had 2 external audits. Back in spring 2018, we had 2 audits actually done of Greeley. And then in the fall, this fall, we had an audit done of all 6 of our buildings. And that was presented at the November 14th Board of Education meeting, which is online if you'd like to review it. We also had 2 community surveys, and we asked our staff and our parents and our high school students about safety and security in our district. And we administered a survey in fall of 2018 and in spring of 2018, and in fall of 2022. We've had a district-wide security task force. We did that in the spring of 2018. And out of that, we added cameras throughout the district in all of our buildings, both inside and outside. We created person traps at the elementary and middle schools. We had added a part-time security supervisor district-wide, and at Greeley specifically, and we've had 2 different task forces looking at Greeley because of the uniqueness of that space. One was back in spring 2018, and one is actually happening right now based on the current audit we just received from Alteris. We added a school resource officer. We increased our security personnel. We added a vehicle checkpoint, and we put in place an electronic locking system for all of our doors. We've also done targeted SEL and DEI work to increase student sense of belonging and to support adult connections. We've had comprehensive risk assessment training for our psychologists and our social workers. We've had the Newcastle Police Department involved to support our families and assess student risk when necessary. We have put in place and have continued to operate anonymous alerts, but we also now have central office oversight. So it's not just going to the building levels. There's people in the central office that are reviewing those alerts as well. We've been working with our first responders to coordinate, and we have planned drills in the future to simulate events on our campus to make sure that we are thinking about how we would move forward if we had to plan and execute a potential event that would be happening here in our space. And then we have regular building meetings and training with our regional safety officer for BOCES. So all of that is happening right now and is in place. If you go to the next slide, I want to share with you what's been budgeted for next year. So what we have in our budget right now is we're continuing the SRO program at Greeley, and I did get some questions around the cost associated with that. So I wanted to share with you, we have a contract with the town of Newcastle, and it's the daily rate for having an SRO here is about $750 per day and I'm estimating that, students are in school 176 days because they're not here on superintendent conference days, but this can fluctuate, but it's approximately $133,000 a staff member. And so we are continuing the SRO at Greeley. We're continuing this security personnel on all of our campuses. We're going to start to put in place door alarms, and we're going to begin with the Bell School. And again, that was a recommendation that came out of our audit. We're going to increase our camera coverage at our secondary level. We're addressing some parking lot concerns by the tennis courts at Greeley. We are continuing to support our SEL work. We are providing funding to support additional areas identified by the Greeley Task Force that we need to address. And I just want to remind the community, the reason the Greeley Task Force is meeting right now is because all of our audits had recommended that we have a single point of entry at Greeley, but the community did not support that in the fall referendum vote. So as a result of the community's decision, a task force was formed to try to develop different ways to increase our safety footprint on that campus without that single point of entry, which exists in the other 5 buildings. And then we're moving forward with our targeted training and building procedural adjustments as recommended by the Alteris audit. And then the community did approve a part of our capital project referendum, which is supporting electronic classroom door locking systems in our buildings, in our elementary and middle schools, because we already have those at Greeley. And so I know that there's been a lot of there's been some feedback from communities that feel like we need to have a police officer in our 5 other buildings. So, and I understand the position, and I completely understand why people are asking for us to move in that direction in this budget. But I do want to share a few thoughts for your consideration. So, if you can move to the next slide. So we had asked the community what their thoughts were on armed personnel in our building. And so we had a really high response rate from our parents and from our staff and from our Greeley students. And so I just want to share with you that, if you can go to the next slide, that while there we received a lot of positive ratings on our safety, and our ratings were much higher than they were when we initially had done the survey back in 2018. People are still concerned specifically about susceptibility to a threat. And we understand that, but there was not consensus on how we should move forward. And if you could move to the next slide. Adam, so we specifically asked this question about having armed personnel in the buildings, and aligned with the research on what we should be thinking about to make our buildings safer for our students, and along the lines with the feedback from the audit, the area of focus that we felt would make the most difference in supporting school safety is training. And so it came out through our survey when we asked our parents and our staff and our students. It came out in our audit with Alteris. And it's in line with the research on the out in the community on what makes a difference in making schools safer. It's your training and it's your protocols. And there wasn't consensus on, moving forward with having armed personnel in our buildings. And if you can go to the next slide, Adam, I would appreciate it. If you go to that highlighted piece, you'll see in that space there are parents here who absolutely think having an SRO is critical to school safety. But then there's also parents here who think that are strongly opposed against that. And so the conclusion was that these results suggest that utilizing school funding to institute this measure would not be widely accepted by the community. And so if you could go to the next slide, Adam, I appreciate it. Okay. And so I just want to say in conclusion, we are making safety decisions, and we're budgeting for school safety in a way that we feel like aligns with research about what works in schools, with feedback from our audits, with feedback from our community, and based on what we feel we need to do to create the safest possible space for our students. So the question could be from the audience, like, why don't you just add it to the budget? So if we were to add 5 resource officers and we add $650,000 to your budget, well, we're already at the levy limit right now. So we wouldn't be able to just add that to the budget, because we would be going over our levy limit, and then we would be asking the community to support our budget through a supermajority. And I just explained that we don't have widespread agreement that is the best way to move forward as a school district. And it's not in line with research on what we need to be thinking about in terms of keeping our students safe. And it's also wasn't recommended in any of our audits that we should add a police officer in our 5 other buildings. And so I do want to share that thinking with you. I know that there are many people who feel very passionately about this, and I get it. But these are some of our thought process in presenting a budget that we feel like is responsive to the outside experts about how to move forward in a way that best meets our safety and security needs. And so if we could just turn off the presentation and then we can move into the Q&A. Tara, if you'd like to, we can start answering questions. So if you could just pose it and then I'll figure out who should answer it. Okay.
Sure. Good evening. I just want to thank everyone for logging in and engaging in the budget process. It's an important one for our district. And just to say, we know how hard the board and our administration work to put together a fiscally responsible budget that meets as many of our needs as possible. So we've heard from the administration. We thank them, and we thank them for their willingness to hear our voices. So for the Q&A portion, many of you have already entered your questions in the chat, and I will just preface it by saying we'll try to address all the questions, but in the interest of time, if there's overlap or if it's necessary to condense the questions, we've done so. If we ask that you restrict your questions to budget-related matters, and if you feel that it falls outside the scope of today's Zoom, our administration is available to you, and please email Dr. Ackerman, the Board of Ed, if your question doesn't get answered today for any reason. So I'll start us, and apologies if something has been covered and we are re-asking it, but we did our best. Why are some middle school sections larger than other sections for other schools?
Go ahead, Andrew. Cresselia.
Sure. We're talking, I think, I think we're primarily asking about the differences in the two middle schools between Bell and Seven Bridges. And so that has to do with the way that the district is districted for different middle schools, where we do have more students who are districted for Bell right now than we do for Seven Bridges. And then in the budget, there are some additional sections in Bell to help bring the numbers a little bit closer together. But the strategic plan is actually looking at one of the topics it's exploring is long-term thinking about the way that the middle schools are enrolled by students to actually work at that. But that's a much bigger and more complicated problem in terms of how many students go to one school versus another.
Okay, great. Has rezoning been discussed with regard to population changes at the same level schools?
I'll take that question if okay. So right now we're in the thank you, Tara. We're in the strategic planning process, and it looks like a target area is going to be looking at our zoning for elementary schools and whether or not we're going to redesign what the configurations in Seven Bridges and in Bell, based on some demographic changes that we're experiencing, which you're also seeing in our enrollment in Bell School versus Seven Bridges. You can also see that in our elementary schools. It's just not as pronounced because you're dealing with 3 buildings versus 2. So we are thinking about that. That will be a priority for us moving forward, but that's a long process. There's an independent study that would need to be done. There are many meetings that would need to be done because that impacts families in all kinds of ways. But it's definitely on the table, and I do believe it will be identified as a target area for us to examine in the strategic plan.
Okay, thank you. Are changes made going to ensure that no class exceeds its student class size threshold at the elementary and middle school levels? I think you've covered a bit of this.
Andrew, Cresselia, would you like to answer that?
Sure. I mean, what we do. I mean, every year when you plan for this, and what we've planned for this year is to start the year in a really good place. We feel good about the projections, but there is always a chance that new students might move into the district and move those numbers a bit. But it always is this, it is a balancing act of planning an appropriately staffed school system for the budget, within our parameters for working with our students and keeping our class sizes reasonable. We think we're in a really good place right now, but certainly once we're going, classes could creep up slightly, and then we have ways of trying to address that, but we wouldn't be creating new sections like in the middle of the year, for instance.
Okay. Related, are the class size numbers on tonight's slides final?
No, we have no. We're watching kindergarten enrollment, And I feel like, although I don't want to commit to, I feel like we're going to increase in both buildings based on where we are right now. Our sections, our numbers are pretty high for March. I do feel like our class size sectioning in grades 1 through 8, which I think is primarily what people are looking at because the high school is so different. I think we are pretty settled on that as our sectioning going into next year. Anything can happen though. So I do want to share with you that if we had a chunk of kids move out or a chunk of kids move in, we would need to plan for that. Also, what we need to think about, which doesn't impact people who live here, but if we start to see class sizes becoming uneven and we have staff's children in there, we do have to do some movement. So those are other things that we're thinking about as well. That's not necessarily on the forefront of conversations with families.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Pease mentioned AI as a component of professional development. Where is the district with regard to including AI in curriculum for students?
Great. Thanks for that question. We recently did or had the focus of a superintendent conference day in March, really be for a large part of it be focused on artificial intelligence, especially around like generative artificial intelligence. ChatGPT-3 seems to be the name that people are speaking about mostly, but artificial intelligence has been in our lives and in our schools for a long time. I think ChatGPT-3 just made it mainstream. And so we're really thinking about it as an educational tool for both students as well as teachers, and thinking about how and where we can use it and leverage it as a powerful technology tool to enhance education. But it really sits in a place like many other tools where there's an appropriate instructional purpose and place where it may be able to enhance our work. And then in other ways, it may be inappropriate for a student or a teacher to use it to, maybe be a substitute to actually doing the hard work of learning how to write, a particular piece of writing or something like that. So that's where we are right now. I'm proud of where we are as a district in terms of being on the forefront of that work. We had a couple of our educators here present at a state conference just last night about our professional development plan around AI. So the goal is really to make sure our staff and students can use it well and responsibly and ethically as we move forward and explore the capacity of it.
Okay, thank you. I'll stay with curriculum. And there was a question about, can you address the presence or lack of information communication technology in core classes in the middle school?
Yeah, so all students do take a WISER course taught by our library media specialists at the middle school level. So that's a course where it's taught explicitly. It's also part of many of our courses with regard to our ELA curriculum. In ELA, it's reading, writing, listening, and speaking across using technology, digital citizenship, et cetera. And we also use the advisory program. So I'd be happy to talk to that parent a little bit more if they'd like to hear more about that advisory program. But we do use Common Sense Media and use digital citizenship lessons integrated into that advisory program through the middle level. So we teach students how to responsibly use that technology and teach them about their online footprint and things like that.
Okay, thank you. Going to safety, as you mentioned, there were a lot of questions about that. Will there be another public vote for single entry at Greeley?
All right, so I can see all the safety questions. So I'm going to try to answer a whole bunch of them, if that's okay, Tara. And
Sure.
then, okay, so we asked the community through a long process if they wanted to support a single point of entry at Greeley, and the answer was no. So it would be up to a future board to decide if they would want to ask the community that question again. And so there's a lot of questions in here about why are we treating Greeley so different than the other 5 schools? Why do they have more and we don't have the same? So, and I understand that. I completely get it. The reason that Greeley has more security, they have an SRO, they were the first building to get the automatic locks, is because they don't have a single point of entry. That's why. And so we needed to make some adjustments to Greeley based on the fact that we were one of the only high schools in our area that didn't have that single point of entrance for visitors to go through to enter into our building. And so that's why we've treated Greeley differently. That's why we will continue to treat Greeley differently than the other 5 schools. The other 5 schools have the same resources. They all have cameras. They all have a single point of entry. They all have the same security. They have the same resources in place. Greeley's different. And Greeley has been treated different and will continue to be treated different because of the structure there. And the audits that we continue to have address the needs of Greeley differently than the 5 other buildings. So that's really why. That's why we made that decision. And we continue to make decisions that are different for Greeley.
Okay, there are a couple of questions about our DEI work, and I guess just addressing that, how the budget will be affected by that, how it's being addressed in the budget.
So Andrew, do you want to talk about our staffing next year?
Sure. I'm happy to talk about the staffing. We went through an extensive process of examining our needs around DEI in the district, including using the Insights Equity Audit, taking a look at our thought exchange. Also, I ran a whole series of focus groups with staff, students, administrators, teachers, community members over a period of time, about 14 focus groups. And what we really gathered from that is everyone involved, all of our constituents groups, are actually voicing the need for more access to professionals around DEI at the building level. So what we've proposed there in this budget is 2 staff developers to support faculty, 1 for elementary grades and 1 for high school grades, to support teaching and learning in the classroom, curriculum support, professional development. And we also have a K-12 counselor to be a contact person for students and staff and for families. Those are in the budget now. Okay, and you touched upon already, Andrew, but I don't know if this one goes to Andrew in terms of getting into more nuts and bolts, I guess, curriculum related issues around DEI, what materials, et cetera.
Adam, do you want to talk about how we select materials, what that process looks like? So our families understand that better?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to like culturally, what you might hear as culturally responsive curriculum, it's really curriculum that ensures that we acknowledge, respect, and appreciate our students' cultures, and that they feel seen and heard in our classrooms, and that they see themselves represented in the books that we read and the authors and the characters. And for us to do some deep thinking about the curriculum that we are teaching with regard to that, and to think about our books as kind of the windows and mirrors, the mirrors being kind of reflecting characters that look like them, maybe come from the same culture as them, and then a window into other cultures that may not reflect where they come from. So that's really the work. It's to do some thinking about our curriculum and how it reflects that, and how it makes all students feel comfortable and all families feel comfortable and seen and heard and valued as part of our curriculum. So that's a lot of the work that we do with regard to reviewing classroom libraries and curriculum materials. We also have a curriculum review process and a instructional material review process, where depending on how the instructional material is used, we have different tiered levels of review. So for example, one of the kind of most stringent levels of review is for a whole class novel where all students of a grade are required to read it. And in order for a book to become a whole class novel where all students of a grade are required to read it, we have a committee of educators, including administrators and teachers, that read that material and review it to make sure, in a variety of criteria that we've articulated and we've shared publicly, to make sure it's a good fit for our curriculum. And then for other things, there's a much lower bar for a book to, let's say, just be in a classroom library, for example, and be a choice book that a student might choose to read, a material like that's not worked into part of the curriculum, but it's available to students. That would just be reviewed by the classroom teacher, for example. So we have kind of those different ends of that spectrum. And I will say, if any parents are concerned with regard to curriculum materials, to reach out to the teacher directly and have that conversation. And certainly I'm available to have a conversation with them after they take that step.
Okay, thank you. How does the number of staff developers we have here compare to other similar districts?
Adam, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, I don't know of anybody that's collected data on all the professional developers, and there's different types of professional developers, and they're categorized differently. Professional developer is not like a certification that you hold, and those data aren't readily and widely available. But I will tell you, we have right now, currently, we have a professional developer for math, K-12 for science, for English, and for social studies. So we have 4 professional developers that are certified in the subject areas with which they do their professional development, and they're kind of the experts that work on curriculum K-12. We also have a tech integration specialist that's also our director of professional learning. So that's the 5th professional developer. And we have 1 current professional developer that's in our DEI role that Andrew referenced with regard to kind of a counselor DEI position. So there's currently 6. And then in this budget, we have the addition of 2 that are going to help us do curriculum work around DEI.
Okay, we're getting a lot of overlap. Okay, will elementary schools have a designated AIS staff member for math?
Yeah, I just want to refer back to the presentation. So I'm going to answer this in 2 different ways. First of all, there's no math certification, because I see a question about this in there. So I'm going to kind of wrap 2 things into one. There's no math certification really for elementary. There's a reading certification, like a certified reading teacher, but a generalist or a special education teacher is able to provide AIS math instruction. So what we plan on doing for next year is we're going to continue to run our morning program for students who require AIS services, who would like to participate in the morning program, because that works better for some of our children and their families. And then for students who are not able to participate in that program, who need AIS services, whose parents choose to have them participate in AIS services, because it is optional, we will provide services for them during the school day in all 3 elementary schools.
Okay. There's a question about sustainability funding. Is that something that we've considered? Practices at the lower levels, for example, gardens.
I guess what is the question about whether or not we're budgeting to support sustainability initiatives, or do we have money in our budget to support science instruction around sustainability? I guess it's hard to answer that question. I mean, we have money in our budget to support our sustainability curriculum. And so I'm not sure about volunteers and gardening at the lower level, but maybe someone could reach out to me directly and I can have a conversation. Or Adam Peace.
I think many of the remaining questions relate to safety, security, and you've covered a good deal of it.
Kara, can I
jump in and
sorry.
I was going to answer. There's a great question about there's 7 people at a grade level of 5th grade. And so what would that structure look like? So I just wanted to field that one if it was okay. We're going to make sure for in 5th grade, we have 2-person teams. So we have 1 teacher that does math and science and 1 teacher that does English and social studies. And that's worked out to be a really nice transition from elementary, where students have 1 teacher for all subjects. And then their first year of middle school, this 2-person team. So when you have one of our community members picked up on, so what if you have 7 teachers at a grade level? So how that works for us is 1 teacher, the students will still have the 2-person team experience, but there will be 1 team of 3 teachers, and those 75 students will rotate they will have 2 of the 3. So the student experience will still be 1 teacher for all students, 1 teacher teaching math and science, 1 teacher teaching English and social studies. Behind the scenes, what's happening is 1 teacher will be teaching math and science in the morning, and then English and social studies in the afternoon. Keep in mind that the teachers in 5th grade are certified to teach all the academic subjects because it's an elementary school certification, and it's not unusual for a 5th grade teacher in the region to be teaching math, science, English, and social studies. So the student experience will not be different. That we'll need 1 teacher to teach all 4 subjects in 5th grade. That'll happen kind of behind the scenes. It wouldn't impact the students.
Okay. Review of the safety expenditures in the budget includes things like money spent on cabinets or upgrading bathroom fixtures. Can this be spoken about? Related to safety?
I think this is in reference to Joe's presentation, Andrew Lennon, and I believe it's his capital line. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so in the budget, we have 1.65 million set aside for capital transfer to address really 2 major buckets. The first being some of the underground utilities, which we know we've had some ongoing issues with over the last year and a half. So that 1.6 million will support that, as well as some various safety and security and building improvement needs, including cameras in our stairwells and door alarm sensors that were in the audit that Christine referenced earlier, and some of those safety and security upgrades. So we're planning to address safety and security and health and safety at all of our buildings through some of that money.
So I just want to go back to, there's a lot, I feel like there's three major threads in here. There's the DEI work, there is our sectioning, right, class size, and then there's safety and security. And so I do want to go back to safety and security, because there's a lot in here, and I am fully aware that I'm not going to be able to present to you a pathway forward that we're all going to feel comfortable with based on what's happening in our environment and in our world. But I do want to say that the decisions that we're making around how we're supporting our safety and security, they're grounded in our audits. They're grounded in research about what makes a difference in schools, which is like training and changes to our infrastructure, like our locking systems and our single point of entries. And a consideration is feedback from our staff and our parents and our students. And we've had 2 rounds of feedback, both in 2018 and 2022. And so how we're moving forward is really anchored in those 3 buckets. And so that's why you'll see different things happening at the Greeley campus versus other places, based on the way that our buildings are configured and how we're able to support security in those spaces. And so I just want to, I understand that we have parents that feel like we need to have armed security or police officers in 5 schools. I get that. I understand why people are advocating for it. I just need to, again, share with you, there has been no audit that has recommended that as how we need to plan moving forward. And we can't, based on the feedback that we've received and the research that we have in our audits, to increase the budget to go to an override to support adding 5 officers to the budget is not something that I feel prepared to present to the Board of Education based on what we know. And I appreciate that there are parents who will absolutely disagree with me around that decision. And I also know that there are parents that will absolutely agree with me. And then there's a parents in the middle that are listening and learning and are just concerned as all of us about what's happening in our communities. So I do want to acknowledge that and share it. And I'm sorry that we're in this space and we're having this conversation. People feel like they need to advocate in the way that they are, because they feel so strongly, which I completely understand as a mother and as a member of our larger community that sends their children here. I get it. I absolutely get it. And I also want to share, there's like this perception that everyone has SROs in all of their buildings and we're the only ones that don't have police officers. That's not true. I was on these email strings about other districts saying that they have officers in their building. Everyone can, people can say all kinds of things, but doesn't mean it's necessarily true. And so I would share with you, when we did our research back in 2018 about SROs, we were one of very few districts that didn't have an SRO in our high school, and that factored into that decision-making process. There is not this widespread police presence in elementary and middle schools throughout the Mid-Hudson Valley, like people perceive there to be. But I don't want to talk about, it's not my place to talk about other school districts have in terms of their security. But just because someone posts it online doesn't mean it's necessarily true. But for me to be correcting that is not appropriate either. So I just want to share that as well.
You mentioned sections as one of the buckets that questions are falling into, disparity in sections, issues with sections. I know you can see a few of those questions, particularly at the middle school level.
Yeah, I would share that, our threshold for middle school is 28. So with the exception of 8th grade in Bell, which is at 19, everything else is below 25. So I think our sections are appropriate. There's going to be differences in the buildings, and you can see those differences in the elementary school as well. And that's part of the overall consideration as we're doing the strategic plan, to talk about whether or not we need to do some adjusting based on enrollment trends. But to say that classes will be even and the class sections will be the same across the district, we can't, I don't think it's reasonable to say that, but I can understand why people are asking the question.
Well, I think much has been addressed. I don't want to take any more of your time or the community's time. I encourage everyone to watch the budget presentations if you haven't. If you'd like to be more informed, definitely go to the Board of Ed meetings, and please come out and vote May 16th. Please, that's the most important place to show your voice. And we thank you all for joining us tonight and presenting.
Thank you. Thank you, Tara, for hosting us, and everyone have a good evening. Thank you.